Knuckles the Echidna is the rival of Sonic the Hedgehog. Shadow the Hedgehog is the rival of Sonic the Hedgehog. But what happens when we remove Sonic from the equation? How do these two stack up against each other? In the 24 years these two have coexisted in this franchise, we haven't really gotten a straight answer. So I thought it would be fun to go over every time these two threw hands across the whole franchise. That means not just games, but comics, TV shows, movies, whatever I can really find, no matter what continuity. And I'm not just counting one-on-one fights either. Anytime these two had been on opposing sides, we'll be going over. I will be taking into account any distinct advantages or disadvantages, but we will be keeping score of who took the most victories. And if the result can't be determined, we'll score it as unclear. My only rule is that it needs to be a proper fight, so I'm not going to count the times they raced each other. And I think it only makes sense to start with. While both of them get a significant amount of screen time during Sonic Adventure 2, they only briefly appear together. In fact, I think there's a pretty solid argument that at this point in the story, Knuckles does not know who Shadow is.
Who the f is this?
Knuckles was kind of doing his own thing that whole game, so it makes sense. In Sonic Heroes, however, the two would face off when Team Sonic and Team Dark met in the Lost Jungle. Unfortunately, this battle does not have a definitive victor, as it can be played from both sides, and no dialogue in the English or Japanese versions of the game seem to indicate a clear victor. Now, there is dialogue making it clear that Team Sonic only found their way to Hang Castle because they followed Team Dark, and you could argue that could be used to determine a victor, but that still feels very tenuous. We'll score this one as unclear. Sonic Battle's narrative actually gives us fights with definitive winners and losers. Unfortunately, Shadow and Knuckles never fight in it. Tails and Shadow fight, but Knuckles and Shadow do not. It's very weird. For these two to face off, we'd have to wait until the Sonic Rivals duology. We're gonna ignore the first game because while they do face off, the gameplay is more akin to them racing and then seeing who can beat up an old man the best. The second game, however, introduced one-on-one battles in lieu of just racing for a second time. And in the story, Knuckles and Rouge do come into conflict with Shadow and Metal Sonic. Unfortunately, this is another battle that can be played from both sides, without a whole lot giving us an indicator of a clear victor. Now, I have seen some people make the argument that as Shadow and Knuckles' fight begins over obtaining Eggman's Emerald Detector, because of the fact that Knuckles and Rouge have the Emerald Detector following the battle, that the canon victors need to be Knuckles and Rouge for the narrative to make sense. Which generally I would agree with, but there are two problems with that. First, when Shadow and Knuckles actually fight, neither of them have the Emerald Detector yet. The Emerald Detector is obtained after the boss fight, so that only proves that Knuckles can beat up an old man better than Shadow, which is not what we're measuring. Secondly, that ignores all the context from Shadow and Metal's story. At this point, anything relating to collecting the emeralds is a secondary goal, as the most Shadow knows at this point is that he needs to stop Eggman's doppelganger to save the world, with him only receiving a passing mention that the emeralds are important. So when his main target shows up, he clearly shifts his focus away from the Emerald Detector and to the duplicate Doctor. So for all these reasons, much like Sonic Heroes, we're gonna score this one as unclear. Don't worry, we'll be getting some actual numbers on the board now with Sonic Chronicles: The Dark Brotherhood. This game features not one, but two boss fights with the Ultimate Life Form before he joins your party. And at the point of the game that this occurs at, you can have Knuckles in your party. But he doesn't have to be. Your party only has 4 slots, one of which will always be occupied by Sonic, and by the time you get Knuckles as a party member, you probably have more than 3 potential teammates. How I'm looking at this though is that there are 2 battles that Shadow canonically has to lose, and Knuckles can be present for them. So I'm going to award 2 points to Knuckles, while also taking into account that he was assisted by 3 others, as well as the fight only occurring at the player's discretion. Now, if someone finds a way to solo this fight with Knuckles, using a cheat device or something to make him the only member of the party, or at least the only member of the party who does anything, I'll ignore the fact he was assisted. While Shadow is a boss in Sonic Boom: Rise of Lyric, he only fights Sonic and Tails. In Sonic Boom: Shattered Crystal, he's also a boss, this time being mind-controlled by Lyric. While he only faces off with Sonic, Knuckles' dialogue in the cutscene following his defeat sort of implies he helped.
Hey, he's coming around. Should we knock him out again?
However, based on the actual gameplay and the fact we only ever see Sonic hit Shadow, I'm not giving Knuckles a point here. It's too much of a reach, but I would be remiss not to mention it. So we're ending the first section with the score Knuckles 2, Shadow 0, and 2 unclear outcomes. But let's see if the Ultimate Life Form can catch up in. Our first Shadow and Knuckles battle is in the 73rd episode of Sonic X, titled Shadow the Assassin, or the Cosmo Conspiracy if you're watching the 4Kids version. This episode sees Shadow try to kill Cosmo, believing her to be working with the Meta-Rex. Shadow sorta dog walks everyone in this episode, but Knuckles is an exception. When Knuckles first challenges him, Shadow actually tries to avoid it entirely, continuing to pursue Tails and Cosmo. When their fight resumes, Knuckles stops his spin dash and redirects him through a wall. On Shadow's next attack, he does take him down. However, what's removed in the 4Kids version is that Shadow had to take off his inhibitor rings to do so, meaning that he had to go all out to take Knuckles down. A win is a win, but we will note that he had to do this. Then there would not be another Sonic TV show until Sonic Boom. Shadow would appear in the last episode of Season 1, It Takes a Village to Defeat a Hedgehog, but Shadow only fights Sonic in that episode and doesn't even exchange words with Knuckles. However, in the Season 2 finale, Eggman the Video Game, Eggman manipulates Shadow into fighting all of Team Sonic. He starts by going after Knuckles and Tails, getting the jump on them and knocking Knuckles through a wall. The two do start a proper fight, with Knuckles recycling a joke from the Sonic X dub.
Good thing I took that shadow boxing class.
I've always wanted to shadow box. As you wish.
Shadow does end up taking both Tails and Knuckles down very quickly. We'll give Shadow the point, noting both that he got his first hit on Knuckles by surprise, but he was fighting two opponents at once. Shadow doesn't face off with any version of Knuckles in Sonic Prime unless we're counting a robot duplicate, which doesn't feel fair to the echidna, so I'm not counting it. Which brings us finally to Sonic 3. Even if you haven't seen the movie yet, you've probably seen the trailer. This is the only time the two directly fight in the movie, which means Shadow takes him out one-on-one, and when he's acting as part of a group. I'm counting this as one fight, so Shadow only gets one additional point. So we're ending this section with Knuckles still 2, Shadow 3, and 2 unclear. But while Shadow's in the lead right now, we still have one more section to go with. Starting with pre-reboot Archie, I do have to talk about issue 167 and why we're not counting it. In the altered future of Light Mobius, yes, Sonic and Knuckles both confront King Shadow, but Knuckles does not get involved in the fight. It's his daughter, Lara Sue, that takes out Shadow. Because Knuckles doesn't participate outside of walking into the room, he receives no points. But from here, we're going to jump ahead to issue 182, with Knuckles as the latest host to Chaos Force deity Enerjack. Shadow arrives to help subdue the enraged god, and though his first hit briefly staggers him, he's quickly sent through a wall. They really like doing that to each other. After Shadow is able to get back up, he removes his inhibitor rings and hits Knuckles with a Chaos Blast so powerful, it threatens to destroy all of New Mobotropolis. However, the Echidna is able to power through the attack, knocking Shadow down. And when the Hedgehog attempts to respond with a Chaos Spear, Knuckles swats it away and hits him with an attack of his own. Sonic, as well as all of New Mobotropolis, attempt to help, only to be frozen in place. Now, Eggman does capture Knuckles after this, but I do think this should count as a win for Knuckles. I've done a short about this fight before, and I did see some comments saying Shadow basically got jobbed out here, but I think if there's anyone it's fair for Shadow to lose to, it's a deity with dominion over chaos energy. It makes sense to me. We're giving Knuckles the point with a big asterisk, noting he was God at the time. As I said before, a win's a win. Hi, Squid from the future. In the middle of editing, I realized I forgot a fight, and it's one I made a video about, so that's really embarrassing. But I'm actually split on whether or not I should count it. It's the alternate future of Dark Mobius, and it's once again Enerjack Knuckles. We never see the fight happen, even in the expanded material that makes reference to it. The most we know is that Gun loses contact with Team Dark, and then we see Soulless Shadow there on the wall. I asked some friends for their opinions, and they said because we don't know anything about the fight, and there's a possibility it's pretty close to the one we just talked about, that I shouldn't count it. So that's what I'm going with. Feel free to disagree in the comments. Now we can move on to post-reboot, where we have an entire arc dedicated to these two in conflict with one another. Total Eclipse, which ran from Sonic Universe number 67 to Sonic Universe number 70. After Shadow suggests moving the Master Emerald to a gun facility to protect it from his brother, Eclipse, Knuckles immediately takes offense to the idea. When Shadow attempts to take the emerald without its guardian's permission, the two inevitably come to blows. The two's initial fistfight is evenly matched, and Shadow decides he's just wasting time and tries to get the emerald once again. He's delayed just long enough by Relic the Pika for Knuckles to grab a hold of him and toss him far away from the shrine. The two are still pretty evenly matched, and even after Shadow starts using his Chaos powers in an attempt to get an edge on his opponent, Knuckles quickly adapts to it. The two are so focused on their fight, they both end up nearly drowning. And even after the two pull each other from the water, they get right back to beating each other up, only stopping once they realize that Eclipse used their fight as an opportunity to steal the Master Emerald, and Rouge chews out both of them for acting like children, prompting them to put their fight on hold and go after the alien. Meaning, despite this really cool fight going on for almost 3 issues, it does end in a tie. 1 point to unclear. Shadow and Knuckles have yet to have a real fight in the IDW comics. Please do not let this video be immediately invalidated. But I said we'd cover everything, and I meant everything. Issue 29 of IDW Sonic has Knuckles hold off the Zombot Shadow. While the metal virus infected Hedgehog is definitely tougher than the average Zombot, in issue 20, Sonic does establish that the virus is making the ultimate life form a less competent fighter. On the other hand, Zombots are essentially invincible. Knuckles and the infected Shadow have a pretty intense fight that ultimately ends when Knuckles finally succumbs to the virus. Because there's a lot happening with this and really only Sonic displayed the ability to hold off the virus, I don't think it's fair to count this as a loss for Knuckles, but we also didn't see a proper resolution to the battle, so another point to unclear. Our final score is Knuckles 3, Shadow 3, and Unclear 4. Just for transparency, I did not plan for the scores to look like this when I came up with the idea for this video. I honestly thought Shadow was gonna be ahead. I was wrong, but I'm kinda glad I am. Both Shadow and Knuckles are great characters, both on their own merits and as foils to Sonic. Even with my own preferences, I would never want to say that one is better than the other. And while I doubt these two will ever completely see eye to eye, I don't think we're going to see one outpace the other. But what do y'all think? Maybe you disagree with my holistic approach to this question. Maybe you disagree with how I counted some things. Maybe, and hopefully I didn't, but maybe I missed something. Be sure to let me know in the comments below. Thank you all so much for watching. I had a thought about this video a while ago, and I hope you all enjoyed. I want to thank all my patrons and give a special shout out to my $5 patrons, Ned Rex, Nate DM990, Diddly Do, and Queer Kaiju. See y'all in the next video.